Let's talk about blending with acrylic paint. Before we get started, I want to mention that not all paint colors have the same opacity. Opacity refers to a paint's ability to conceal the surface beneath it. So most paints have a little icon to indicate whether they are opaque. That's represented with a solid square, or if the square is half shaded and half the color poking through, that's going to be semi-opaque. And you'll notice if the paint tube has a different color font and all those icons, as long as it's filled in, these both represent opaque. And then these colors here both represent semi-opaque. Just nice to know about the different opacities for each color you're using because it could impact the different colors and how they blend into each other. Many people like to start by thinning their paint down with either a little bit of water, which paint manufacturers usually say it's okay to add a little bit, but some folks really don't want to strip down the binder of their paint, so they might opt for something like a glazing medium or another acrylic medium to dilute the paint. I have a variety of brushes in different shapes and sizes. I always like to mention your brushes are a variable to your blending. Typically, smoother brushes are going to give you a smoother blend. If you have, I like to refer to them as bristly brushes where they're a little coarser, you might have a little texture in your blend. So it's important to note blends don't always have to be smooth. They can look a variety of ways. It's just the idea of merging wet paint into wet paint so we get a little subtle variation, a transition of color. It can look a lot of different ways. So know that different shapes, different sizes, that's all going to impact what your blending looks like. Let's go ahead and lay out the palette. I'm just going to pick a few colors and I'm going to put my more opaque colors on one side. That's light blue permanent. I've got a turquoise blue. And I'm going to use white, which is also an opaque paint. Gonna do my semi-opaque on the other side there. I did medium magenta, alizarin crimson, cadmium yellow medium hue, and then I'll do some of this light olive green. So I'll just use some water for thinning in this demonstration, but again, you can definitely use paint mediums if you'd like to. So I am using cold press watercolor paper. I've just got this taped to a drawing board here for the demonstration. You can practice blending on watercolor paper, canvas paper, panel, stretched canvas. A lot of times canvas is going to come pre-gessoed, whereas watercolor paper does not have gesso on it, although some people do choose to coat gesso. A gesso is just a bright white acrylic primer and it can provide a seal. The paint is not going to soak into your paper. But for my first layer of blending, I'm going to be thinning down my paint on my palette here, and then I'm going to apply a layer on the paper. So for my first layer, I'm going to use a little bit of water and I'm just thinning my paint. And I want to talk about direction of stroke. So for this first one, I'm going to use a classic kind of horizontal stroke. My paint is thinned down a little bit with some water. I'm just reloading my brush. And then while this is wet, that same brush, I'm pulling in a little bit of white. Okay, and I'm going to work these two colors into each other. So I'm just going to add some more white. Just kind of back and forth, just lightly going over that. Now I can also kind of dry my brush off, grab some more of my original color, and just kind of start working that back down if I just want to go over that seam a little bit more and really soften that transition. And then the other thing is, I was using two opaque colors, even though I thinned them down. They were both opaque, the white and the turquoise blue. So I can let this dry and do another coat if I want it even smoother. The idea is as long as the colors are wet, I can transition them into each other. You might move your brush in different ways, so this is that horizontal. What happens if I make a vertical stroke instead? And I think sometimes it's good to practice different types of strokes because it depends what you want to paint, what you want to blend. A sunset makes sense for a horizontal blend, but there could be, something different that you want the vertical blend for. So again, as your paintbrush fills up with paint, you can always wipe it off and then kind of softly go back over. And then sometimes the answer is load your brush up with some more paint and then layer it on top and then continue to blend. And again, this is going to give you that softer, smoother transition between colors. Now, if I even want to get a little bit more and just kind of keep pulling those colors into each other, kind of keep working back and forth, and you'll be able to get a softer transition. Or I can let that dry and then do another layer. So we'll revisit the second layer in just a minute. But there's some other ways we can move our brush that I think is kind of fun to explore. So thinning just a little bit with water helps keep the paint wet, but again, you can use a glazing medium or another type of acrylic medium. But for example, I could even do kind of like a circular stroke, where maybe I start with darker ring on the outside, and then as I progress to the middle, I can grab some of the white, and I can certainly grab a different color too. We'll do some other colors in just a moment here. But then I can paint that kind of that circular shape in the middle, and I can just kind of take my brush, I can overlap it. But I think it's nice to practice different directions with your paintbrush because then you'll just kind of build up some of the skills to blend different types of things depending on what you're painting. So that's why I sometimes like just the little practice papers or practicing techniques like this, because it's kind of like a drill or just a little rehearsal to kind of practice before you want to do it on a final painting. So I'm just working in a little bit more white. And then as I pull to the outside there, I want to load up my brush with some more paint. I'm going to go ahead and, start bringing that around the outside. And you can try different brushes too. Maybe I decide, oh, that brush isn't the best brush for what I'm doing. Maybe I want this kind of softer flat brush. It's a little bit smaller, and then I can kind of bring that around. So try your different brushes, try different strokes, see what you like, see what works well for you. The main concept though is you want to work wet paint into wet paint. So whether or not you choose to add water, it's still blendable without water. I know some people that don't use any water in their acrylics ever, and then I know other people that do. So multiple approaches. But this idea is I can kind of go back over and just start to soften. And then again, the more layers you apply as it dries, you can create even a softer blend. And then sometimes I like to take a dry paintbrush and just kind of light pressure. Pressure is another variable. Heavy pressure is going to look very different than light, soft pressure. So consider that as your dry brushing. I think soft pressure works really well here. And you might lift paint when you dry brush over wet paint a little, okay? So sometimes it's nice to let it get just maybe a little tacky, or understand that you will have to layer that up. So all of these I can kind of revisit. So if I want to go back to this first one really quickly, some people like to keep layering thin down paint, so that's called glazing, and build up with thin layers. Other people like to go heavier on that next layer and build up the thicker paint. So that's up to you, but I'm just same process, working that lighter color and then kind of creating that transition, nice and subtle, and just kind of working my brush back and forth over top. And then I can, again, dry my brush off, or maybe I want to rinse it off a minute, get a little fresh color. I'm just going to work a little bit more of the white into the bottom just to get more of a transition. I'm just kind of softly going over. Then I can even let this dry again and do a third layer if I want. It's okay to build up those layers. Yeah, it just depends how smooth you want. Because sometimes, if I was gonna do a sky gradient, it might be nice to have a few little streaks in there. And other times I want it perfectly smooth. So it's just highly variable on what you're painting and what you want that to look like. This is thicker paint, so I'm not thinning this down right here. Working that back and forth. Again, I can grab a little bit of that first color. And this time I'm maintaining that kind of vertical stroke I got going on. So following that direction. Sometimes it's like when you are using a single brush, it's easy for the darker color to kind of take over, become dominant. So sometimes I do really find it helpful to wipe that brush off and then get back in there. And that goes too if it's too light. Sometimes you need to kind of darken it back up and add the darker color back in. But it's okay, it doesn't have to happen instantly. It's okay to work on it for a minute. All right, and then we're starting to get smoother. Now I can definitely have a bigger transition if I want to, and it would just require me to kind of keep working back and forth. Kind of running low on my white on my palette here, so it's gonna have to add some more. It's just giving that nice, soft, light pressure. I can always dry brush too. Dry brushes, I typically like them to be a little softer, but then you can get that softer blend. So again, after that dries, if I want to bring in, for the circular blend, I kind of like this other brush better. So again, try different brushes. You never know which one's going to work the best. And then you'll end up finding your favorites usually. So here I'm just taking a little bit of a dry brush and just kind of softening that blend and just kind of merging one color into the next. I'm going to grab a little bit more white here. I just did add a little bit of water on the brush too, just to help smooth that out. It's starting to dry a little bit. So again, if it's gonna dry on you, it's not going to blend. So having a little tiny touch of water or medium will help you get that blend a little smoother. So for the next few, I'm gonna switch and work with my semi-opaque colors just to see how those respond to some of the blends. And I'm gonna show you some different ways you can move your brush around to create some different types of textures that are still blends. They're just not your classically smooth blends. There are some other ways to, again, just create some texture, some visual interest, or just other ways to merge colors together. So I'm gonna start with a magenta, a medium magenta. I am thinning it out with a little water. I'll just show you my palette here. You can see I'm thinning it out, just kind of moving some down. And then I'll probably go into, maybe we'll go into a yellow. So the first thing I want to show you is basically, it's sort of like scumbling as far as like the movement, but it's not true scumbling. But if you think of it kind of as a drawing motion, it's like circular motions. So if we take circular motions and move our brush around, kind of like scrubbing in a way. And I'm actually going to use two brushes for this. I'm going to grab some of my yellow, same thing, just adding a bit of water into it. And then I'm going to scrub or kind of scumble into the magenta. And then same thing as I was doing before, I'll just kind of work the colors into each other a little bit. I've got my two brushes here, so kind of going back and forth. But then the idea would be to build this up in layers just like I did with a smoother blend. So while that one is drying, we'll put another coat on that in just a moment. I'm gonna use the same colors just to make it easy with my brushes. And we also have stippling, or tapping, kind of like pointillism, but a tapping motion. So if I kind of tap, and you can try different brushes. Remember, different brushes are going to give you a different textures. So try different ones, see what you like. Then I'm going to take my yellow, and kind of tap to the right first, just to get that pure yellow in there, because remember, as soon as I bring it into that magenta, we're gonna start merging them, because they're both wet, and I can just kind of tap, 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 and kind of build that layer. Remember, you can load up your brush, grab some more color, but you can see, even with the water, of course water is going to make it more transparent, but initially these colors, because they're semi-opaque, might require more layers than these colors, which are more opaque. So let's go ahead and let this dry, and I can revisit this side. I still see some dampness over here, but it's dried up quite a bit. It's enough to take another layer at least. So same thing, I just swirl my brush around at those circular motions, loading up my yellow brush. I can just kind of swirl back and forth. You can make that transition as big as you want, but you can use more than 2 colors too. So feel free to explore that. And then on top of something like this, a scumble, I can pull a dry brush and go over top just like I did with those smooth blends. I can kind of blot it and bring it back. And then when this dries, I can do another coat because I'm still seeing the paper poke through. This one, I definitely want to let that set up a little bit more. So while that one's drying, I'm going to grab a couple other colors and show you a couple different ways you can move your brushes too. So I'm grabbing a flat brush. This time I'm going to use the alizarin crimson and the green. And this time I'm not thinning down the paint. I'm going to do some horizontal lines. Just imagine like cross-hatching. We can actually blend paint by just making a series of strokes. Doesn't even have to be smooth, big patches of color, although it can be. Again, that's the fun part about this, is we get variety, we have options. What happens if I take some green and start stroking it the opposite way? It is blending. I'm also creating texture. I'm gonna go back in this way. And you know, trying different color combinations too, you're gonna get different effects and with different brushes. Again, I always like to think about what are all the variables that I could try that are gonna produce some different results. You know, like these strokes are like very close together. You know, what happens if I take that same technique, maybe space the strokes apart a little bit. I'll grab a different color, grab the yellow. You know, I'm still blending, I'm creating texture. It's a different way to blend, but your paint is wet paint on wet paint, so it's merging together and creating other colors. Then I could even do something like actually this is one of my opaque colors. Let's bring that in there. Again, all these strokes are getting blended with the paint that was there before it. And I'm just moving my brush, rotating it in different directions. It's not true cross-hatching necessarily, but it's kind of in that, or it's that general idea at least. So I could do something like that. So other ways we can make marks actually is by placing colors next to each other. So this isn't so much a blending technique as a kind of added bonus. This is optical mixing. So let's say I wanted to create the illusion of orange. So instead of actually mixing the orange, what I could do is place, and they could be dots or they could be other types of marks. I'll just do some kind of quick little circles, and they're definitely not perfect. Kind of quick little swirls with my brush here. Then what I can do is take a second brush or clean that first one off and grab some of the yellow. And when I place that next to the red and pull back, we get an illusion of a blend. So sometimes acrylic paint can be layered without true blends and can create an illusion of a blend. But I definitely want to make sure to talk about different ways we can actually blend, because I know some people, that's their goal. They want to really get the paint colors to transition one into the next. But I did want to mention, you know, you can keep adding more layers to this, and then as you pull back in space, your eyes kind of bring that together and it looks more orangey than separate red and yellow. But again, that technique, similar to Ben-Day dots, if you're familiar with that, with comic books, newspapers. You can get the illusion of color, we can get the illusion of value with a second coat, just to kind of build it up. And then you can have white space, you can eliminate the white space. That's totally up to you. So again, not true blending, but you get that idea that we can layer colors in an interesting way. And I did want to revisit this one up here. So I've got my brushes, loading them back up with color. And this is the one where I'm tapping. So this next layer, and again, you can add a little bit of water if you like that. Otherwise, you can use it just straight from the bottler tube and have it be a little thicker. I can just repeat that technique, and then this time I'm going to be able to get even more of a transition. Remember, you can always take another brush, a dry brush if you want to, or slightly damp, your choice, and kind of tap in between those transitions. So just kind of tapping between those transitions until you get the look that you like.